In 756 AD, a Chinese general named Zhang Xun was trapped inside a besieged fortress with almost no supplies. He had soldiers, he had walls, but he had 0 arrows. Without arrows, the fortress would fall within days, and every man inside would die. So, on a pitch-black night, Zhang Xun ordered his men to lower hundreds of human-shaped straw dummies over the walls on ropes. The enemy commander, seeing dark figures descending in the moonlight, assumed it was a surprise night raid. He ordered every archer to fire. Thousands of arrows hammered into the straw. Zhang Xun pulled the ropes up and harvested over 100,000 free arrows from his own enemy. The next night, the enemy saw the figures again and refused to shoot. Fool me once. So on the third night, Zhang Xun lowered his actual soldiers. The enemy ignored them completely. Those soldiers dropped silently into the camp and broke the siege. That triple-layered deception happened 13 centuries ago, and the psychological principles behind it are still being used by military commanders, intelligence agencies, and cyber warfare units right now today. Most people have never heard of them. By the end of this video, you will understand all 15. Welcome to Silk Road Annals. Act 1. Hacking what you see. The first category of ancient Chinese psychological warfare targets the most fundamental weakness in human decision-making. We trust our eyes. Control what an enemy sees, and you control every decision they make after that. 1. Create something from nothing. You just heard the story of Zhang Xun's straw dummies during the An Lushan rebellion. But here is what makes it extraordinary in context. While European armies in the 8th century were still battering fortress walls with brute force siege towers, a Chinese general was treating his enemy's ammunition supply like a withdrawal from a bank. He manufactured an illusion, deposited fear, and withdrew 100,000 arrows. 3 transactions, 3 nights. Total cost, straw and rope. The principle: fabricate a threat that forces your opponent to waste real resources on a phantom, did not stay on ancient battlefields. In 1944, the British military ran Operation Quicksilver, a component of the broader D-Day deception, in which an entire phantom army group was fabricated in southeast England using inflatable tanks, fake radio chatter, and dummy landing craft. German reconnaissance planes photographed it all. Hitler held back his panzer reserves at Pas-de-Calais for weeks, defending against an army made of rubber and plywood. Zhang Xun would have recognized it immediately. 2. The fog of deception. Humans are pattern recognition machines. We cannot help it. If you show the brain 3 data points that form a line, it will predict the 4th. Ancient Chinese strategists realized that if you control the pattern, you control the prediction. In 341 BC, the Qi strategist Sun Bin was retreating from the aggressive Wei army led by General Pang Huan. Sun Bin knew that Wei soldiers considered his men cowards, so he fed that assumption like kindling into a fire. On the first night of the retreat, his troops lit 100,000 campfires. On the second night, 50,000. On the third, 30,000. Pang Huan tracked the declining numbers and concluded exactly what Sun Bin wanted him to conclude. The Qi army was hemorrhaging deserters. Drunk on contempt, Pang Huan abandoned his heavy infantry and raced ahead with light cavalry to finish the job. He rode straight into a narrow gorge at Meiling. Sun Bin's full-strength army was waiting in ambush. The Wei cavalry was annihilated. Sun Bin did not manipulate Pang Huan's intelligence. He manipulated something far more dangerous: his confirmation bias. Pang Huan already believed the Qi were cowards. The campfire pattern simply gave him 3 nights of evidence that confirmed what he wanted to believe. He never questioned whether the evidence was designed. This is the architecture of every modern disinformation campaign. You do not create a new belief. You identify an existing bias and manufacture evidence that feeds it. The target does your work for you. 3. The empty fort strategy. In 228 AD, the Shu Han strategist Zhuge Liang found himself in the city of Zhicheng with only 2,500 non-combat personnel. Bearing down on him was the Wei general Sima Yi, with a force that outnumbered his roughly 60 to 1. Now, a critical note. This story comes from the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, one of the most influential military novels ever written. Whether it happened exactly as described is debated by historians, but the reason it matters is that for centuries afterward, real Chinese generals studied it as actual doctrine. The story shaped real wars, regardless of whether its origin was fact or fiction. According to the account, Zhuge Liang ordered all military flags hidden, the city gates thrown wide open, and a handful of civilians to sweep the streets. Then he climbed to the viewing platform above the main gate and sat playing a guqin, a traditional stringed instrument, with 2 young attendants beside him. When Sima Yi arrived and saw this, his brain locked up. He knew Zhuge Liang's reputation as the most cautious strategist in China. A man who never gambled, a man who always had a plan. If he was this calm, there had to be an overwhelming ambush waiting inside. Sima Yi ordered a full retreat. Zhuge Liang did not defeat 60 to 1 odds with a weapon. He weaponized his opponent's own knowledge. Sima Yi's intelligence was the trap. The more he knew about Zhuge Liang, the more frightened he became of what he could not see. It was an information overdose. Modern cybersecurity teams exploit this identical instinct with honeypots. Servers deliberately left wide open and undefended. Experienced hackers, the Sima Yis of the digital world, see a target that looks too easy and immediately suspect a trap. Their expertise becomes the wall that keeps them out. 4. Make a sound in the east, strike in the west. There is a concept in modern military theory called the OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, act. Every commander cycles through these 4 steps before taking action. If you can corrupt the very first step, what the enemy observes, the remaining 3 steps produce the wrong answer every time. Ancient Chinese generals called this Sheng Dong Ji Shi. Make a sound in the east, strike in the west. You create an undeniable threat in one direction. It demands attention. Attention is a finite resource. The moment your enemy concentrates their defenses on the noise, their opposite flank goes naked. That is where you strike. The most famous modern execution of this principle was Operation Fortitude during World War II. The Allies built an entire fake army group in southeast England under the fictional command of General George Patton. They broadcast fabricated radio signals, deployed rubber tanks and plywood aircraft, and even had double agents feed the locations to German intelligence. Hitler became so convinced the main invasion would hit Pas-de-Calais that even after D-Day landings began at Normandy, he refused to release his panzer reserves for critical hours, believing Normandy was the decoy. The sound was in the east, the sword fell in the west. 2,000 years apart, same principle, same outcome. Act 2. Hacking what you feel. Controlling what someone sees is powerful, but it has limits. A disciplined commander can always demand better reconnaissance, verify reports, send scouts. The next level of psychological warfare bypasses rational analysis entirely. It targets the limbic system: fear, greed, trust, desire. The parts of the brain that react before the thinking mind even wakes up. 5. Acoustic warfare and the amygdala hijack. The human brain's fear center, the amygdala, processes a sudden terrifying sound in roughly 12 milliseconds. That is faster than conscious thought. By the time your rational brain formulates the question, "What was that noise?" your body has already dumped adrenaline, spiked your heart rate, and narrowed your vision. Ancient Chinese and Mongol armies understood this reaction 1,000 years before neuroscience had a name for it. The Mongols engineered what they called whistling arrows. The arrowheads were carved from bone or drilled wood with hollow chambers that produced a piercing, otherworldly shriek as they cut through the air. A single volley of several thousand whistling arrows created a sound unlike anything a soldier had ever heard, the sky itself screaming from every direction simultaneously. The effect was not just psychological, it was physiological. Muscles locked, formations broke. Soldiers who had trained for years to hold the line simply froze. Meanwhile, Chinese generals used highly structured war drum systems to control troop movements in real time across chaotic battlefields. A sudden shift in drum cadence could spike the adrenaline of their own troops while simultaneously shattering the morale of the enemy, who could hear the change but could not decode its meaning. This technology did not disappear, it evolved. In 2009, the cruise ship Maersk Alabama used a long-range acoustic device to repel Somali pirates with a focused beam of painful high-frequency sound. Military and police forces worldwide now deploy LRADs for crowd dispersal. The hardware is 21st century. The operating principle, you can physically assault the human nervous system using nothing but sound waves, was discovered on the steppes of Central Asia. 6. Toss out a brick to attract jade. During the Mongol campaigns across Central Asia and Eastern Europe, Genghis Khan's generals perfected a maneuver that European commanders fell for again and again. Against a heavily fortified position, Mongol cavalry would charge, engage briefly, then suddenly break into what appeared to be a panicked, chaotic retreat. To sell the performance, retreating riders would drop heavy sacks of gold, weapons, and bolts of silk on the ground behind them. The defenders, seeing the fearsome Mongols apparently fleeing in terror and leaving behind a fortune, lost all discipline. Greed overwhelmed training. They abandoned their walls, broke formation, and rushed into the open to scoop up treasure. That was the trigger. The Mongol retreat reversed instantly. The riders who had been fleeing moments earlier wheeled their horses, and fresh cavalry units emerged from concealed flanking positions. The disorganized looters, now stranded in open ground, with no formation and no walls, were encircled and destroyed. The brick was the dropped treasure. The jade was the undefended army. The Mongols understood something that modern behavioral economists have since confirmed. The prospect of a windfall gain temporarily shuts down risk assessment in the human brain. When you see free money on the ground, the prefrontal cortex, the part that whispers, "This might be a trap," goes quiet. 7. Hide a dagger behind a smile. During the Warring States period, the King of Wei sent a breathtakingly beautiful courtesan as a gift to the King of Chu. The king became infatuated. His existing queen, Zhang Xun, had every reason to react with open jealousy. Instead, she became the new girl's closest friend. She lavished her with gifts, jewelry, and personal attention, completely disarming any suspicion. Once trust was fully established, the queen whispered a piece of advice. "The king adores your beauty, but he secretly dislikes the shape of your nose. When you are near him, cover it gently. It will please him." The courtesan believed her and obeyed. When the king noticed the girl constantly covering her face in his presence, he asked the queen why. Zhang Xun, feigning reluctance, said, "She told me she covers her nose because she cannot bear your majesty's scent." The king, humiliated and furious, ordered the courtesan's nose cut off. The queen eliminated her rival without ever raising her voice. Every weapon in the attack, the advice, the gesture, the insult, was delivered by the victim herself. This pattern recurs throughout geopolitical history. When a powerful nation extends massive infrastructure loans to a developing country under the banner of partnership and friendship, the generosity is real. But so, sometimes, is the leverage. If the recipient cannot repay, the lender gains control of ports, mining rights, or strategic territory. The smile was always genuine. The dagger was simply patient. 8. The honey trap. For millennia, the most reliable weapon against a disciplined, well-defended target has not been a siege engine or a poison. It has been desire. The 31st of the 36 stratagems, the beauty trap, or Mei-ren-ji, weaponizes human loneliness. The classic execution is simple. An attractive operative is introduced into the life of an enemy commander. The commander becomes distracted. His decision-making deteriorates. His subordinates grow resentful. His family fractures. The entire command structure rots from the inside, and no army ever had to breach the walls. We tend to think of this as ancient history or spy fiction. It is neither. In 2010, a fake LinkedIn profile named Robin Sage, purporting to be a young female cybersecurity analyst, was created as an experiment by security researcher Thomas Ryan. Within weeks, Robin Sage had been accepted as a contact by military officials, intelligence personnel, and defense contractors. Several shared sensitive documents or revealed operational details to someone who did not exist. The experiment demonstrated that the honey trap had not just survived the digital age, it had scaled. According to the Commission on the Theft of American Intellectual Property, IP theft costs the United States up to $600 billion annually. Intelligence agencies from multiple nations have acknowledged that a meaningful portion of that theft involves relationship-based recruitment. Modern honey traps executed over social media, dating apps, and professional networking platforms. The ancient Chinese were right. No encryption is strong enough to protect a lonely engineer at midnight. Act 3. Turning the enemy into his own weapon. The stratagems in this final category are the most sophisticated and the most chilling. They do not require you to deceive the enemy or frighten the enemy. They require you to use the enemy's own structure, his own people, and his own logic against him. By the time he realizes what happened, the attack came from inside his own house. 9. Besiege Wei to rescue Zhao. In 354 BC, the powerful state of Wei laid siege to the capital of the smaller state of Zhao. Zhao sent a desperate plea to its ally, the state of Qi. The Qi generals wanted to march directly to Zhao and fight the Wei army head-on at the siege. The strategist Sun Bin stopped them. Sun Bin's reasoning was precise. The best Wei troops, their most experienced, most dangerous soldiers, were currently camped at the siege of Zhao. That meant the Wei homeland, including their capital, was defended by second-rate garrison troops. Instead of fighting the enemy's strength, Sun Bin marched the Qi army directly toward the Wei capital. Panic erupted in the Wei command. They had no choice but to abandon the siege and force-march their exhausted army back to defend their own city. Sun Bin did not meet them at the capital. He chose the road. He positioned his rested, fresh troops along the Wei army's return route at a place called Guiling and annihilated them as they straggled home, tired, demoralized, and strung out over miles of road. He never fought the strong army. He made the strong army become the weak army, then fought that. This is the logic behind asymmetric competition in every domain. If a startup tries to beat a tech monopoly in their core product, the startup bleeds out. But if the startup attacks a neglected niche, a customer segment, a supply chain vulnerability, a regulatory gap the giant is ignoring, the monopoly has to pull resources away from its main front to respond. The moment they do, their dominance develops cracks. 10. Kill with a borrowed knife. Why risk your own army when you can make someone else do the killing? The most efficient version of this stratagem does not even require hiring mercenaries. It requires a rumor. Throughout Chinese history, spies would infiltrate an enemy state and spread whispers that the most brilliant, most loyal enemy general was secretly plotting a coup against his own king. Paranoia, once planted, grows on its own. It does not need evidence. It feeds on silence, on ambiguity, on every sideways glance and private meeting. Eventually, the king's fear would overpower his judgment, and he would execute his own best commander. The attacking army would then sweep in against a decapitated defense. The most devastating historical example occurred not in ancient China, but in Stalin's Soviet Union in 1937, when German intelligence fed disinformation suggesting that Marshal Mikhail Tukhachevsky, the Red Army's most capable officer, was conspiring with Germany. Stalin, already consumed by paranoia, used the fabricated evidence to justify the Great Purge of the Red Army Officer Corps. Between 1937 and 1938, the Soviet military lost 3 of its 5 marshals, 13 of 15 army commanders, and roughly 35,000 officers. When Germany invaded in 1941, the hollowed-out Red Army suffered catastrophic early defeats. The borrowed knife had done its work years before the 1st Panzer crossed the border. Today, the knife is digital. State-sponsored information operations use bot networks, deep fakes, and algorithmically targeted content to amplify existing divisions within rival nations. The goal is never to persuade an enemy population of something new. The goal is to make them distrust each other so completely that they tear themselves apart. The attacking nation never fires a shot. The borrowed knife is the target's own citizens. 11. Loot a burning house. Sun Tzu wrote that when a country is consumed by internal disaster, disease, famine, rebellion, corruption, it cannot simultaneously defend against an external threat. The pragmatic response, he argued, is to strike precisely at that moment. This was not abstract philosophy. In 208 BC, the Qin dynasty was collapsing under peasant revolts and internal power struggles. The rebel leader, Liu Bang, who would later found the Han dynasty, deliberately waited while Qin generals fought each other and the capital descended into chaos. When the internal fire had consumed the regime's ability to organize a coherent defense, Liu Bang marched in and took the capital with minimal resistance. He did not start the fire, he simply walked through the ashes. The modern version is relentless. During the global disruption of 2020 and 2021, when governments worldwide were consumed by public health emergencies, cyber attacks on critical infrastructure surged. The Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack in May 2021 shut down the largest fuel pipeline in the eastern United States. Hospitals in Ireland, Germany, and the Czech Republic were hit with ransomware during active pandemic operations. The attackers understood the ancient principle perfectly. When the house is on fire, the locks stop working. 12. Beat the grass to startle the snake. When you suspect a hidden threat but cannot see it, you create a provocation designed not to destroy the threat, but to force it to reveal itself. You beat the grass. The snake, startled, moves. Movement is information. In 1968, during the Vietnam War, US Special Operations ran a program called Operation Eldest Son, in which sabotaged ammunition was covertly planted in Viet Cong supply caches. The rounds were designed to explode inside the weapon when fired. The immediate tactical damage was minor. The psychological effect was enormous. Viet Cong fighters began to distrust their own ammunition supply, their own weapons, and by extension, their own supply chain. The snake did not just reveal itself, it began biting itself. A separate, more literal application occurred throughout the conflict. US forces dropped life-sized dummy paratroopers from aircraft over dense jungle canopy. Viet Cong anti-aircraft teams, seeing what appeared to be an airborne invasion, opened fire on the falling dummies and instantly revealed their hidden positions. Real bombers followed minutes later. In corporate negotiations, the equivalent is deliberately inserting a provocative or unexpected clause into a contract draft. Not because you want the clause, but because the speed and intensity of the other party's reaction tells you exactly what they are afraid of. You beat the grass. Their fear is the snake. 13. Lure the tiger out of the mountain. A tiger inside its mountain cave is untouchable. It knows every rock, every shadow, every escape route. Fighting it there is suicide. The only strategy is to make it leave. In 199 AD, the warlord Sun Ce wanted to seize the heavily fortified territory of Liang. A direct assault on the mountain stronghold would have been catastrophically expensive. So Sun Ce sent an emissary with lavish gifts to the ruler of Liang, flattering his military genius and proposing a joint campaign against a minor neighboring threat. The ruler, flattered and hungry for an easy victory, personally led his elite troops out of the fortress to attack the smaller target. The moment the garrison was emptied, Sun Ce's forces took the undefended capital without a fight. The tiger left the mountain changed owners. This is the exact architecture of modern phishing attacks. A hacker knows they cannot breach a bank's encrypted mainframe directly. That is the mountain. So they send a carefully crafted email to an employee, urgent, flattering, plausible, that lures the employee to log into a credential harvesting page on an external, unprotected server. The employee leaves the mountain. The credentials open the gate. According to IBM's 2024 Cost of a Data Breach report, phishing was the most common initial attack vector, and breaches initiated by phishing cost organizations an average of $4.88 million. The tiger still leaves the mountain. The cost has simply gotten larger. 14. Slow off the cicada's golden shell. When a cicada molts, its old exoskeleton remains clinging to the tree, perfectly intact, still looking exactly like the living insect. Meanwhile, the real cicada has already flown away. The shell is the decoy. The escape is the objective. During the chaotic retreat of Liu Bei's forces in the Three Kingdoms period, his general Zhang Fei was tasked with holding the Changban Bridge against a vastly superior pursuing army. Zhang Fei ordered his small cavalry unit to tie bundles of tree branches to their horses' tails and ride back and forth through the dense forest behind the bridge. The branches kicked up enormous clouds of dust, creating the visual impression of a massive hidden army maneuvering in the tree line. The pursuing commander, seeing the dust and suspecting a major ambush, halted his advance. While his army stared at the golden shell, the dust cloud of a non-existent force, Zhang Fei and the refugees escaped. In modern cyber operations, this technique is called attribution masking. Sophisticated attack groups route their intrusions through servers in multiple countries, leave false flag code comments in foreign languages, and deploy malware strains associated with a completely different threat actor. The digital forensics team finds the golden shell, a trail of evidence pointing to the wrong country, while the real attacker vanishes. The cicada has already flown. 15. Sacrifice the plum tree to preserve the peach tree. In ancient Chinese poetry, the plum tree endures the killing frost so that the neighboring peach tree survives to bear fruit in spring. In warfare, this became the doctrine of calculated sacrifice, deliberately giving up something valuable in the short term to secure something irreplaceable in the long term. During the Battle of Changping in 260 BC, one of the largest and bloodiest engagements in ancient history, the Qin general Bai Qi executed a devastating version of this stratagem. He sent a forward detachment to engage the Zhao army head-on, then deliberately ordered that unit to retreat and absorb heavy casualties. The Zhao commander, sensing victory, pursued aggressively, directly into a double envelopment. Bai Qi's main forces closed behind them. The Zhao army, now surrounded and cut off from supplies, was besieged for 46 days before surrendering. The plum tree, the sacrificed vanguard, purchased the peach, the encirclement and destruction of over 400,000 enemy soldiers. The modern equivalent operates at a different scale, but with identical logic. When a dominant tech company launches a product at a deliberate, massive financial loss, absorbing billions in subsidies to undercut a smaller competitor, it is sacrificing the plum tree. The competitor, unable to match the artificially low price, bleeds out and dies. The surviving company then owns the market unchallenged. The peach tree bears fruit. Conclusion. From the whistling arrows of the Mongol steppe to the phantom armies of Operation Fortitude to the phishing emails sitting in your inbox right now, the tools of conflict have transformed beyond recognition. But the target has not changed at all. Every one of these 15 stratagems attacks the same operating system, the human brain. Its pattern recognition, its fear response, its craving for certainty, its loneliness. 2,700 years of technological evolution, and the vulnerabilities are identical. Think about Zhang Xun one more time. A man with no arrows, no reinforcements, no hope. He lowered straw dummies into the dark, and his enemy handed him the weapons to survive. 3 nights later, the enemy could not tell the difference between straw and flesh. They had trained themselves not to see the real threat. Somewhere tonight, a server sits wide open on the internet, completely undefended. Somewhere tonight, an inbox holds a perfectly crafted message from someone who does not exist. Somewhere tonight, a pattern is being manufactured, and someone is about to trust it. The dummies have changed. The arrows have not.